Became, in a sense, I think, handmaidens of the world chemical industry.
The entomologists began to discover what appeared to be serious side effects. As they investigated the effectiveness of large-scale spraying programs, they found that many other species of wildlife were being harmed.
We found out soon that there were some side effects, even as early as 1946 and 47. But the benefits were so great. We eradicated malaria from the United States, let alone many other places in the world. And so there wasn't the public pressure on. We were killing off birds in some cases. It was quite obvious that these species were disappearing starting in 47 or 48. And by 53, even the birds that lived quite a few years were beginning to disappear, and they weren't replacing themselves because the eggs weren't hatching.
These side effects led to serious disagreements among the entomologists. At their annual conference in 1953, their president made an impassioned defense of the chemicals. His speech was entitled, "The Greater Hazard, Insects or Insecticides." The choice, he said, was a simple one. Either continue spraying or return to the bad old days of starvation and disease. Everything should be done to minimize the side effects, but ultimately it was a war of survival. Insecticides had already saved 100 million human lives throughout the world.
At our scientific congresses and meetings, we were completely immersed in a haze of propaganda about chemicals. There were lavish hospitality suites, banquets sponsored by the chemical companies, and a great many entomologists were employed by these companies. I'm sure they were absolutely convinced that what they were doing was of fundamental and very valuable importance to the world.
The chemical companies also portrayed the battle against the insects as a necessary war. Promotional films of the 1950s invoked Charles Darwin. They depicted it as part of the inevitable struggle for existence.
Wherever man is, there the ant is also. They seem to come from nowhere and suddenly are everywhere at once, crawling over the food. As the hordes invade, man often gives up his pleasures in utter despair. It is the law of nature. The strong survive.
Now, in evolution, all living species are essentially in competition with each other, and the ones that are most successful survive. And insects, as has been said, will inherit the earth because they're so successful. And insects carry diseases to human beings, such as malaria, and when we spray to kill the insects, we're interfering with evolution. If evolution were to proceed, then we will be overwhelmed by the factors that are against us.
Do you realize how easy it would be for them to overcome us humans? Then instead of being the hunters, we'd become the hunted. They'd be our masters. They'd live on us.
When people in the post-war period spoke of a struggle in nature, they were selecting one aspect of Darwin's theories that suited their time. Now, for Darwin, nature was a bloody battlefield. There were winners and losers, victors and the vanquished. But this imagery took on special significance in the Cold War years. In the American Midwest, when I was growing up, the household aerosols were called insect bombs. The point is that in these life and death struggles, scientists believed that they were seizing power from evolution and redirecting it by controlling the environment. They took it on faith from the biologists that this is how the world works. And then they chose to emphasize those aspects of Darwin's theory which fitted in best with the industrial programs they were embarked upon. This was not a neutral reading of Darwin at all. This was an interested reading.
Anything left behind?
Nothing but a dead spider.
Well, this time he's going to stay dead. Dead and buried.
Well, let's say at least until some egghead comes along and digs it up again.
The first serious public attack on the widespread use of pesticides came from Rachel Carson. She was a biologist who had worked for the United States Fish and Wildlife Service. In the late 50s, she began collecting evidence of the side effects. In particular, studies which showed that DDT was becoming more concentrated as it worked its way into the bodies of larger animals. In 1962, she wrote a book called Silent Spring. It was an attack on the chemical companies.
It started coming out in the New Yorker. She kept it rather quiet. She knew that the chemical industry, or the part of it she was worrying about, would react. And sure enough, the official of the Velsical Chemical Company wrote a very threatening letter to Houghton Mifflin. You must not print this book. And came out with the standard line that they still use. You see, if we stopped using all these pesticides, it would simply ruin the whole economy of the country. And this is a sinister plot by the far-left subversive forces, as they call them, to destroy the United States.
Silent Spring painted a dramatic picture of a poisoned America. It caused an immediate sensation. It coincided with revelations about thalidomide and the fallout of strontium-90 from nuclear testing.
When I got the book, when I got home, I read that, and I got about 2/3 of the way through the book, and I saw so many things I knew were not true that it bothered me. When I set out to make a lot of speeches to try to let people know what she had said and what was really the truth, many other people were doing the same thing across the nation. So usually at some time during the talk, somebody would be interested in what about the effect on people. And it was handy at that time to have a box of DDT like this one, and so I could just dump some out in my hand and take some of it to show that it's not harmful to people. Never has been. Nobody's ever been killed by DDT. I've not even heard of anybody being made ill by it, even when they attempt suicide.
In 1963, the book was made the subject of an hour-long TV special. 3 of the programme's sponsors, food and chemical manufacturers, withdrew in protest. Carson used the programme to widen her attack on the chemical companies.
Now, to these people, apparently the balance of nature was something that was repealed as soon as man came on the scene. Well, you might just as well assume that you could repeal the law of gravity. Man's attitude toward nature is today critically important, simply because we have now acquired a fateful power to alter and to destroy nature. Unless we do bring these chemicals under better control, we are certainly headed for disaster.
Ms. Carson maintains that the balance of nature is a major force in the survival of man, whereas the modern chemist, the modern biologist, the modern scientist believes that man is steadily controlling nature. If man were to faithfully follow the teachings of Miss Carson, we would return to the Dark Ages, and the insects and diseases and vermin would once again inherit the earth.
The ironic thing was how Robert White Stevens died. He died as the result of the sting of a wasp.
In 1963, Rachel Carson died. Although her book had caused an outcry, it had no immediate effect on the use of pesticides. But another attack on the chemical industry was about to be launched, this time from the suburbs.
Although the faces of America's major cities seem relatively unchanged, a quiet revolution has been taking place there for nearly a decade. More than 1 million persons each year have pulled up stakes in the cities and turned commuter.
America's suburbs had grown enormously during the 50s, often on land made habitable for the first time with the use of insecticides. But continued spraying to treat diseases such as Dutch elm now brought the side effects of the chemicals into the gardens of the wealthy and articulate middle classes.
We live in what's called the Gold Coast area, the wealthier people. And so we had money right away to buy this stuff and the machinery and the men. And so they went around and squirted, first of all, from the ground. But that didn't last very long. Soon, there was a whole page in the Sunday Milwaukee Journal on how now Shorewood and Fox Point and Bayside, where I live, were really going to take care of their elm trees. And they had a photograph of a helicopter spraying with DDT. And not too long after that, the robins started going to convulsions. It would start out, you'd see the robin, you'd think it would be all right, and then all of a sudden this quivering would go on.